So this broadcast is going to be slightly late for the occasion. I haven't spoken about American Independence Day in quite a long time, but I have had a long track record, I suppose, of having many American friends. I know quite a bit about the country, about how it was set up, about the thoughts of the founders, about how things changed, etc., etc. And I thought it would be nice, because I, don't get out very much, to share that wisdom with everybody over the years. And I haven't spoken about Independence Day in a long time. And the last time I did, I think I did a recitation of the Declaration of Independence. And I mentioned how close the Declaration of Independence was to the Magna Carta in terms of what it sort of said, the complaints it levelled towards the Crown, and how, even though the two documents are split by about half a millennia in time, and they come from two different audiences completely, they illustrate a similar thing about the way that absolute dictatorships work, and also how when the wrong person is sitting with his bottom on the throne, the same sorts of injustices, I suppose, occur. So this time I want to actually talk about American independence, because I don't think even many Americans seem to understand this. For a start, the American independence only really is granted to the original 13 colonies, okay? What you now see of the United States, most of that was owned by other European powers. The British actually didn't have the majority of the New World, as they called it, America. Spain had a load of land in the south. The French had a load of land, across the central, north and south. And the Dutch had a little tiny portion over near the Pacific as well, I believe. So actually there were only 13 colonies. Now those 13 colonies developed into states, but at the time they would have literally been 13 independent sort of colonies. And the problem was that the Hanover dynasty had sort of taken over, and we had a long-standing king on the throne. And I think, if I'm right, this George, I think it may be third, something like that, he was one of our longest running, I think he's the longest running king, longest lived king that we've had. So he was around a very, very long time. Unfortunately for everybody, historians have generally said that he was also Delalitat, basically, not in possession of all his marbles, a little bit clinically insane, which is not brilliant, is it? And the British in the colonies were getting annoyed about two things. The first thing, well, three things really. The first thing was that the colonies were not well represented in the House of Commons. I think that is probably a thing which resonates very much today with Scotland, for example, which, the Scottish Parliament voted to remain in Europe. But they're represented by a few people in the Westminster government, and they're now faced with the fact that the what's left of the empire, I suppose, the Union, is going to completely ignore their populace, completely, and go ahead with what it wants to do anyway, because it takes a generalised view of the entire Union, which they feel is unfair when it comes to representing their particular views. The other thing, of course, was taxation. The upper classes in England itself lived extremely well, and the whole point of the empire for them was to acquire things, tea from China, things from imports from India, and excesses from the New World, that sort of thing. Theirs was a life of luxury, and in order to provide for that, you need a lot of money. And you're not going to tax them, are you? No, you're going to tax the empire, the people that you have, taken control of and so to speak, ruled over, which doesn't work with the Americans very well, because those are they're not a conquested people. They're not a people who have been subdued by the crown. They are more like a crown dependency. They are an extension of the crown, and they were being treated very much like they were a subordinate, very much like they were something that had been conquested. And they did have their own provincial little governments, but they faced big problems, like, for example, whenever they wanted to do something that had far-reaching implications, a change in protocol or something like that, which they felt was absolutely necessary in order to keep order, their government would agree to it, and then they needed to send that off to the British government, basically, to ratify. And that process was, it was a bureaucratic nightmare. And it would have been a bureaucratic nightmare if Parliament was, not playing silly buggers with the colonies, but the Parliament was in no hurry to discuss any changes that the colonialists wanted. And some of that was justified. Some of that was because, whilst the colonies were British, and they were in one way saying that they were extensions of the mainland, not a conquest of the mainland, they were acting very much like a conquest in what I think to the crown probably constituted treachery. The colonists had a habit of trading with their neighbours. Now, their neighbours were the other European powers that were on the continent at the time. So Spain, for example, France, for example, and they had a habit of being able to import things from the Pacific Ocean that they shouldn't really have been able to get hold of. They weren't getting them through the Commonwealth. They were getting them through, the areas that were owned by France and Spain. France and Spain and England have never been friends. We do not get along. We have a long history of almost eternal warfare, particularly with France. And at that point in time, Britain and France were at war. And so the British government was not particularly happy that the American colonies were complaining about a lot of hardship and then going and dealing with the enemy in far-flung places that couldn't be controlled by the British at that point in time. For the Americans, it became a situation where all the colonies felt the same way. They had had enough. They felt that they were far enough away. They felt that they were entitled to trade with whoever they wanted to. And so on the 4th of July, they had a convention where all the sort of elders, I suppose, you could say, all the representatives of those individual sort of little city-states, that's what they amounted to at that point, got together and decided that they were going to flip the birdie to the British Empire and say, look, it's not working, you're not doing what you should be doing, we feel we can do a better job, we've tried our hardest, now we feel the time has come to say goodbye. We want our independence. They came up with a Declaration of Independence, which was a list of everything that they felt the Crown had done towards them that was unjust, and also a definition of what they thought a free state, a free nation state should be. For example, free nation states should be allowed to make peace and war with whoever they want to. France, for example. They should also be allowed to trade with whoever they want to. France, for example. So you can see that a lot of this was politically motivated as well as being just in its accusations against the British government itself. And what happened then was a war. Now, the Americans like to say that 4th of July is their Independence Day. I personally refute that, because that's not true. The 4th of July was the start of an attempt, and a successful attempt, at being granted independence. You aren't independent of somebody until you have thrown them off. You cannot just turn around and say you are independent. You have to win the battles that follow that initial declaration, and you have to, in some way, submit the people who have ruled over you until they are in a position where they will accept that you have your own authority. And two things are important to this. The first thing is, the chances are quite high that the US would not have gotten off the ground had it not been for the fact that they were allied with the French. And one is very suspect here about whether the French helped the United States win the War of Independence because they thought it was good and proper for the United States to be their own free state, or whether because they didn't like the British anyway and they were already at war with the British and the Americans were their trading partners, whether that is what more the reason why that they came and helped them win. And the second point, of course, is that they did win. They did win, and the reaction to them winning is very interesting, and one we should take notice of when we activate Article 50 in the EU. When the British failed and lost the 13 colonies, there was the Peace of Paris. And that was a few years later, in September 1783, 84, if you want to wait until after it was signed and ratified by all. And originally the idea was that Britain, Spain and France would negotiate. Spain, France and the US would negotiate as one bloc against the British. And the British said, no, we want to deal with the Americans as just us and just them, which was fantastic, because the British were actually really, really nice and really, really good in their dealings with the Americans. And because they signed this treaty of friendship under such good conditions, what they allowed was excellent trading partners. You know, England turned around and thought, look, we've lost the colonies. The best thing we can do now is basically give them as much as possible so that they sign with us very good accords before the French and the Spanish talk them into signing things that maybe will be at our detriment permanently. Which means, of course, then the later signings with things like Spain and things like France and the British were literally just land swaps. They were, well, you know, okay, we've lost to Spain, so we'll give you back this island in the South Pacific, you know, and etc., etc. So if it hadn't have been that way, if England had chosen to speak to them as a bloc, then France would probably have been whispering in the US's ear, oh, you want to ask them for this and you want to ask them for that. The way that they did it meant that they got the best deal out of the fact that they had also lost. And And of course the US was quite young and naive at that point anyway, so I don't think they had any idea what was going on in terms of those treaties. But the treaties meant that there was a lasting recognition of the US and its independence, and France and Spain were pacified by land swaps. And of course then it was all to do with the US talking to Spain and talking to France about how it could extend, south and west across the continent. I think Spain, there was warfare, and I think France mainly sold its possessions eventually to the US, that sort of thing. But it was a process. It was a process a little bit like adolescence. The Declaration of Independence is a little bit like the United States having its voice break. Not becoming a man on his own right. No, that didn't happen until the Treaty of Paris, or the Peace of Paris, in September the 3rd, 1783, or 84 if you want to wait for everything to have been ratified by Spain, the Netherlands, the US, Britain, and France. So when the US go on about celebrating their Independence Day, it's really only a matter between Britain and 13 states in the Union. And there were issues on both sides to do with politics and to do with, treating people unfairly. And I thought that I would just make that point, especially the date. Really, guys, you should be celebrating this on the 3rd of next month, not the 3rd of September, 2 months' time, rather than the 4th of July. But Americans will be Americans, and as far as they're concerned, it was a foregone conclusion once they had, said that. I'm not sure at all that the people that actually signed those documents and sent them to England thought they were free because they had done that. I think George Washington knew that he then faced a long struggle and a battle in order to gain independence. I'm not sure he would mark July the 4th as being the Independence Day, at all. I'm not sure about that. And I'm not sure that, I think he recognised that had things gone differently, he would have been executed as a traitor, probably, and the colonies would have been massacred. And things would be very, very different today. But that's not how it happened, and we have to grin and bear that, don't we? We lost the colonies, oh dear, and now they rule the world. Well, there we are.